You are listening to the Mary Jane Society podcast, where you will meet entrepreneurs, cultivators, scientists, doctors, and inventors in the cannabis industry.
I'm your host, Pam Schmiel, marketer and publicist in the cannabis industry. Johns Hopkins University, renowned for its world-class medical program, established the Cannabis Science Lab a number of years ago, but its research has become increasingly critical as the U.S. government continues to neglect its duty in this area, hindering the industry's growth and economic development. Armed with a Schedule I research license, access to the state-of-the-art cognitive testing equipment, an in-house pharmacy capable of formulating various products, and a reliable supply of high-quality cannabis flower and extracts, the lab is well equipped to conduct rigorous investigations. Today our guest is Professor Ryan Vandrey, one of the esteemed professors, researchers, and scientists leading research at the lab. We talk about their latest studies and the major consumer observational study they are about to ramp up and announce. Let's welcome Professor Ryan Vandrey.
So I thought if you could just tell us about your background and how the Cannabis Science Lab got started and what your role is there, and then we can get into all the questions.
Yeah, sure. My background is I'm an experimental psychologist by training. I got my PhD at the University of Vermont and did my postdoctoral fellowship here at Hopkins and then stayed on as faculty. And so the Cannabis Science Lab has been something that's just evolved. So at the time that I kind of came in, there was no cannabis research being done here, but research being done on a number of other different classes of drugs. So we're the part of the behavioral pharmacology research unit. So historically, there had been some cannabis research done here in the mid 1980s and early 90s. But the folks doing that had moved on to other things or moved on entirely. And so I did cannabis research on cannabis withdrawal in graduate school. And so it was kind of a niche that was not really being studied here, but filled a kind of a gap in our larger program. So I started writing grants and doing research on cannabis here, and then Tori Spindle and Austin Zamarripa and a couple other folks came through and did postdoctoral fellowships here with us, and then stayed on as faculty, kind of the same path that I took. And so we've just kind of slowly grown the number of folks doing research on cannabis here, and we got to a critical mass where we said, hey, let's just put a name on this. And try to establish ourselves as an entity and as a group of like-minded folks that are doing common types of research.
Wow, that's great. So how many researchers do you have now?
So I believe we have 8 faculty who are affiliated with the lab and a couple postdoctoral fellows, and then an army of research coordinators, nurses, and pharmacists that work with us.
Wow, that's so cool. And then how do you decide on what research projects to tackle?
So it really is a combination of what we see as research priorities and what our priorities to funding agencies. So our research is entirely funded by grants and contracts that we get. So it's not from internal Hopkins money. So we write applications to get funding from federal agencies, and on occasion we're contracted by pharmaceutical companies or cannabis companies to do research on their behalf. And in those cases, it's always the case that we would take it on only if it's intellectually stimulating or academically interesting to us. Mm-hmm. And so really, we've got a unique setup here in that we have, a Schedule I license, and we can get cannabis and THC and other controlled substances here. We have really nicely outfitted space where we can bring healthy adults in and do cognitive testing. We have a sophisticated driving simulator now. We can do lots of different stuff. And we also have an in-house pharmacy and a pharmacist who is open-minded, where we can do different formulations of raw drug products as well. So, for example, my colleague Tori Spindle now has gotten a grant to study different formulations of THC extracts. So we do gummies and beverages and baked goods that mirror the exact technology and method of manufacturing as what's found in dispensary products. So so we're bridging the gap, and we're closing the barriers between what historically has been retail's over here and science is over here. We're bringing them together.
So exciting. Oh my God. I mean, we need it so desperately in the industry. It's really exciting. So are you able to name any of the companies, like the cannabis companies, or who are funding this or interested in partnering with you?
I mean, so and it's interesting. We think about it differently, right? So we've done contract work for Cultivate Biologics. We have worked closely with folks from Charlotte's Web and from Canopy Growth on projects. And again, it really depends on what the need is on our end and what the need is on their end on what we do. We also work with nonprofit organizations. So we've got a long-standing partnership with Realm of Caring, which is a nonprofit foundation based in Colorado.
Yeah, I guess why I'm also asking is because, the problem in the industry is there's not a lot of private investment because of, legal reasons. So the whole industry has really been struggling because of that to try to move forward. So that's why I was curious, because I've been digging, trying to find who is actually investing money into moving science forward. So that was really why I was asking too.
Yeah.
And to put the idea into people's head that they need to be doing these kind of things and funding these kind of projects. But everybody is trying to, their profit margins are so small, no one has any money to put to this. So it's nice to see somebody like Canopy Growth, or of course Charlotte's Web. I feel like they're the ones always trying to move things forward. So, and then where do you source your cannabis material from?
All over the place. So it really depends on the need and what's available. So raw botanical cannabis we've historically gotten through the NIDA drug supply program. So Mahmoud El Soli down at the University of Mississippi is a very good friend and good collaborator for us in that regard. He also, in addition to the cultivation that he does for the NIDA drug supply program, has his own company that has GMP manufacturing and can do extracts and distillate extracts and manufacturing of synthetic drugs for us. So he's provided THC distillate. He's provided synthetic Delta 8 THC for us in the past, and other products like that. And then we've also gotten like CBD from a variety of vendors. We've imported synthetic THC from a company in Germany called THC Farm.
Oh.
So, we will get what we need. We identify what we need, and then we look for source products. But the key for us is that any products that we use have to come from a federally legal source. They have to be manufactured in accordance with GMP specifications. So it has to be a GMP product because we're giving it to human participants. And then we need all of the testing and quality control and everything in place to get FDA approval to use the product in our research.
Okay, because I know in the past, I guess that's really opened up, because I thought in the past Mississippi was the only university that was legally allowed to supply. And one of the big industry complaints about that is that they're not producing good quality, or good quality cannabis, or reflecting what's really in the marketplace.
Yeah, so I can speak to that, and they are producing absolutely great quality cannabis.
Okay.
The knock historically was that it wasn't high potency cannabis.
Uh,
So you look back when we started this work 20 years ago, we would get 6% THC cannabis, and that was not what was the high times, bud of the year kind of cannabis, but it works. And
yeah.
it got everybody in my lab that came in high. And all the same effects happen, you just smoke a little bit more of it. And as the demands have changed and as the market has changed, so have they. And so the cannabis that we get from them now is 18 to 20% THC. It reflects the chemical composition of what you find in the dispensaries. But it still looks different because in order for us, again, scientifically, we don't want a big bud that is going to go on the cover of High Times because that bud is not homogenized. The chemical composition of one bud to another bud to another bud, even on the same plant, is different. And so for us to have consistency in the dosing across different people and across different sessions within the same person, we have to grind the plant material up, homogenize it, and then have it consistent across our entire experiment rather than having different people have different experiences based on which bud we happen to grab for them that day. And so in medicine, in drug development, you want the same thing every time, right? You want reliability, you want consistency in your medication. You don't want to take your medicine one day and have it be very different from the next day. And part of that is we still don't understand, people talk about certain strains or certain cultivars having an ideal response for a particular health condition. Well, why? What's unique about that particular botanical and that particular health condition? Let's drill down on that so we can pull out the key pieces and isolate those. Now, people will say, well, we want natural medicine and this. It's the same thing, but what ends up happening is you get that reliability, you get that consistency, and then you change the formulation, and nowhere else in medicine do we smoke our medicine. So smoking raw botanical cannabis, yes, it's helpful to some people, but it's not the most reliable and it's not the most precise form, right? So if you can pull out and say, all right, these two cannabinoids and these two terpenes are the key components of this particular cultivar for this particular health condition. Let's pull those out and reformulate them in a way that's going to be ideal for the patients with that health condition.
So would you mean that it would have to be synthetically made, or?
It doesn't have to be synthetically made, no.
Okay.
And there are many examples where botanicals are refined and extracted. I mean, Epidiolex is the perfect example of that. And so it can be botanically derived or it can be synthetically manufactured. And no one to date has done a good job of actually comparing the two. Chemistry is chemistry and chemical entities are chemical entities. Now, there are stereoisomers and things like that where there are very subtle nuances. You can have the same chemical structure, but a different chirality. But no one has taken those things and directly compared. People just kind of emotionally want to believe that one is better than the other without any data.
Which actually, this is a good opportunity to talk about your research in the comparing the Delta 9 and the Delta 8s in the hemp space. What can you say about that?
Yeah, and so those are the kinds of questions that we like to attack in our lab is let's take industry claims and put some data behind them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so and let's try to understand at a basic level what the differences are between different types of cannabinoids and different formulations and different routes of administration. So one of our current themes in the lab is comparing different isomers of delta 9 THC. So delta 8 THC is very prolific in kind of the unregulated hemp market space, right? And there are a lot of claims about its, diet weed or THC light or whatever, but the only controlled research studies were conducted in the mid-1970s. Nothing to knock against those studies. There were some really, really good experiments done back then by some talented scientists. But what we've done is basically taken that premise and moved it into modern technology in terms of research methods, but also applying it to modern forms of administration. So the research that Leo Hollister did in the 70s comparing delta 8 and delta 9 compared oral dose and IV doses. And nobody is injecting THC these days. So we took a vaporized dosage form and we made cannabis infused brownies for our edibles, and compared multiple doses of delta 8 THC to delta 9 THC and found that indeed delta 8 is less potent. It's about half as potent as delta 9 THC. And the reason for that difference in potency seems to be a differential metabolism. So delta 9 THC and delta 8 THC are both metabolized into two different primary metabolites. First, to an 11-hydroxy metabolite, which is psychoactive and causes the same types of drug effects as the parent molecule, and then to an inactive, non-intoxicating metabolite, a carboxy metabolite. And so what we found in our first experiment is that you get much higher concentrations of that psychoactive 11-hydroxy metabolite for delta 9 versus delta 8. And that correlates well with the difference in potency that we see between the two drugs.
And I know there's another one, there's a couple out there, HCC or HHC or something.
HHC and THCO, and there's
THCO, right?
delta 10
Okay.
THC, and a lot of variants, and this is all kind of come out of just a policy disaster that happened when hemp was legalized and all of its derivatives, with the intent of making CBD available and to have hemp fiber available for textiles and other uses, right? But people have latched on to that and started producing drugs that have the same drug effect profile as delta 9 THC to get around the fact that delta 9 THC is a controlled substance, and these now are technically not, but they should be, because they're producing all of the same drug effects as delta 9 THC. They're intoxicating, they cause impairment, they can result in adverse effects with people, but and there's quality control issues there as well for many of them. So the education is not there, and the common perception is, oh, it's legal, I can buy it at this store that I can walk into, therefore it must not be harmful.
So are these, the HHC and THCO, are they being produced synthetically? Because I know when this all started going through the loophole and putting these products out there, it was all being done synthetically. But now I know a lot of companies are moving to just do the delta 9 and not do the delta 8s and those others by mass extraction process, because we know that hemp has low THC content. So now they're really doing mass extraction. So how do they?
But that's not what they're doing. That's what they're telling people they're doing, because that's the legal way of deriving it. But it's still synthetic. And you can argue it's semi-synthetic in that they're taking hemp, extracting CBD, and then doing a chemical conversion of CBD to either delta 8 or delta 9 THC or HHC or whatever. It's still synthetic, but it's botanically sourced. And so they're not taking the natural amount of delta 9 or delta 8 in hemp, which are very, very, very small amounts, and wasting the entire crop to get a little bit of delta 8 and delta 9 THC. That's not what's happening.
This I find really interesting also is your study in the chemical compositions compositions between formulations. I would love to, get into that. And I guess, what does that really mean? Are you talking about like different cannabinoid and terpene formulations? Are you testing those different things or?
So we're doing some of that. So we're looking at THC terpene interactions. We've done a
Oh,
series of experiments there. We recently published one where we looked at delta 9 THC and limonene. So limonene is a citrus, common in citrus plants. It's a terpene that's commonly found in cannabis, and it's one that many claims are made about its anxiolytic effects. And so we ran an experiment based on hypotheses that Ethan Russo laid out over a decade ago about how limonene could reduce the anxiogenic effects of THC in cannabis. And so again, in order to test that, we didn't get a high limonene strain of cannabis. We got pure limonene and pure THC, and we had healthy volunteers vaporize either THC by itself or THC in combination with increasing doses of limonene. And in fact, we did see that limonene mitigated the anxiety or panic-inducing effects of high doses of THC. So it was a really good outcome in which we put data behind some of the industry claims about how these things work with each other. And it highlights how limonene might be valuable in terms of formulating and reducing the risk of side effects of some THC products. We followed that up with a similar experiment where we looked at whether or not alpha pinene reduced some of the adverse consequences of high doses of THC. And the hypothesis there was that pinene could reverse some of the memory impairing effects of THC, and we did not see any evidence of that. So we've got two different experiments. One supports claims from the cannabis industry and one refutes claims. Now, again, these are singular one-off experiments. They need to be replicated, and we need to look at different doses and other routes of administration. These were both inhalation of vaporized products. So we're getting ready to launch a study now where we're going to try to replicate our limonene findings with an oral dose. And we're got another experiment looking at interactions between myrcene and THC.
And then there's also rumors out there that terpenes alone can can provoke some sort of high. There's been terpene only drinks made out in the West Coast, which I've tried, and people claim they've tested with a group of participants who claimed that they did feel a high off of. What do you think about that?
Well, I need to know what the terpenes are and what doses are, but many of the terpenes are biologically active, and we've known that for eons, right? The beta caryophyllene is in pepper plants and has known physiological effects. The linalool is in the lavender plant. It's in many essential oils. A lot of limonene, pinene are in essential oils that people use for mood enhancement and other things, right? So the smell therapies and things like that. So we know that these are not inert chemicals. It's just it's one way that people have latched onto to differentiate cannabis products. And it's, again, areas where we can do research to explore exactly how these things interact and whether or not we can use some of that information to develop better products.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's exciting. All this is very exciting. And then how about the differences between different consumption formats? Uh, I think you were also looking at between. I would love to know actually about topical. Have you looked at anything topical?
We have, yeah. So again, my colleague Tori Spindle ran an experiment recently looking at different topical hemp products. And these were retail products that we purchased. So we purchased a whole huge host of these things initially and had them chemically analyzed. And then looked to see what amount of THC and CBD and other cannabinoids were in the actual products. Because one of the things that we've seen repeatedly, especially products purchased outside of regulated dispensaries, is that what is on the label is often not what is in the actual product. And so we tested the composition of these products and then identified 5 different topical products that had different formulations that had the highest concentrations of THC and CBD in them. And then we ran a laboratory study where we had volunteers come in and apply the product while they were in the lab for a day, and then take it home and use it twice a day for 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks, it might have been 10 days, but around there. And then we looked for drug effects. We looked for blood levels and urine levels, saliva levels of different cannabinoids to see which of these products actually resulted in systemic absorption of the cannabinoids. So the results of that research showed that, again, poor label accuracy on the products. A lot of the products didn't have any cannabinoids in them. Some of the products that said they were THC free had THC in them. A lot of the products had health claims on them that were really questionable at best, and really shouldn't be there. And then when we ran the experiments, we found that I think we had like a patch and a balm and a cream and a lotion, and something else, but five different things. And really the sum was we didn't see any evidence of any absorption for some of the products, and we did see some absorption in others. And the ones where we did see transdermal absorption, there was a permeation enhancer in the product. And so this goes back to other research previously that's shown that THC and CBD are generally not transdermally absorbed. So in order for them to get into the body in a topical formulation, you need an alcohol or a DMSO or some other permeation enhancer in the product that's going to help force those chemicals through the skin, because otherwise they're not permeable.
So to go to the different consumption formats like smoke, vape, edibles, sublingual, what can you tell us about that?
Well, what we can tell you is the route of administration is very important, and it's important for a couple different reasons. So one, it's going to impact the timing of the effects that you get. So when you inhale any drug, really, and in this case, cannabinoids, you have an immediate physiological exposure in the brain. If we're talking THC, if we're talking, interoceptive drug effects, you get immediate exposure in the circulating system and into the brain. So your peak drug effects are going to happen almost immediately after exposure. And then we see a fairly linear decline in terms of drug effects and bioavailability after inhalation of THC, of CBD, of delta 8 THC, so all of those things. Oral absorption, the drug takes a while to get out of your stomach and into your bloodstream. Cannabinoids are highly metabolized in the gut. And so you have what that results in is a very slow rate of absorption, and you get a different level of THC to those metabolites, or CBD and its metabolites, in your blood once it goes through the gut, because part of it is metabolized in your gut before it goes into your bloodstream. And so that's different than if it's inhaled. And so if we're talking about delta 9 THC, you have a slower onset of drug effects. So usually onset of drug effects within about 20 to 30 minutes. The peak level of drug effect usually happens between 1 and 3 hours after you take the edible. And that contrasts with immediate after inhalation, so whether you're smoking it or vaping it. And then that peak level lasts for longer. So if you're thinking about using cannabis from a therapeutic point of view, if you need immediate relief from some symptom, inhalation might be a better option. If you need short-term immediate relief, versus if you're trying to manage a long-term chronic symptom, an oral dose formulation or a topical formulation with an enhancer would probably be better. Now, within oral dosage, there's lots of variance there. So the variation is going to depend on the formulation of the product and what you eat and what your stomach contents are. So THC and CBD both are like oil and don't like water. So they're hydrophobic, not hydrophilic. And so if you put the drug in an oil or in a high fat formulation, you get better absorption than if you eat it in like mixed with a water or tea or something, or in a gummy matrix that doesn't have any fat to it, unless you eat it with a high fat meal. So if you eat a high fat meal and then take the cannabinoid, you actually get much better absorption of the drug than if you eat it on an empty stomach. And then there's new technologies now being developed where there's nano emulsions that are being made in things like beverages and gummy matrices that flip that hydrophobic and hydrophilic state, and that facilitates faster and more complete absorption. So that'll shorten the onset of the drug effect, but it'll also shorten the duration of that peak effect and have a faster offset of drug effects.
Is there anything to say about that as far as beverages, which is, one of the hottest items out there right now? I mean,
Yeah. So again, if there's a nano emulsion in
yeah,
beverage, then it will have a faster onset. We believe. Now we're in the middle of an experiment evaluating this. This experiment's not done, but the theory and the claim in the industry is that these emulsions give you a faster onset of the experience, and also minimize that first pass metabolism in the gut. So we are doing the research to try to put some science behind that and to validate that claim. But again, if you don't have an emulsion and you were to just stir some THC into a tea, it's not going to go into solution in water or tea or soda or any of these other seltzers. What ends up happening is you get a pool of what looks like oil, the beverage, and THC is sticky. It's like gum, but worse. And it'll stick to the side of the container that you put it in. It'll stick to the lid. It'll stick to all kinds of stuff, and it won't be in the liquid that you're drinking.
That's right. I did hear that beverage manufacturers need a special coating on the inside of their can for that issue, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So in our case, we use silanized glass with Teflon lids.
Okay.
To prevent that adherence of the THC to the container.
And then I guess winding down, I know you talked a little bit about your observational study, but is there anything else? So you're looking at data on the impact of medical cannabis use, is that right? So we've been talking a lot about recreational, but you're also focused on medicinal uses?
Yeah. So I mean, most of what we do are these tightly controlled lab studies where we take a very known drug product and give it to healthy volunteers, and we study them under observation, have them answer questionnaires and collect blood and things like that, have them do cognitive testing here in the laboratory. But we're also very interested in tracking the impact of medicinal cannabis use on health of individuals. And I feel like that's one of the biggest missing pieces in all of the cannabis policy reform and all of these new initiatives to legalize medical cannabis and to make these things available and for people to promote it, is as a society, we have failed to follow up to see if that's a good thing or not, and to see for whom it's good and for whom it's not so good. And so we've been at that game for a while now, again, working with the Realm of Caring, doing observational research. on people taking cannabis for medicinal purposes, trying to understand what types of products work well for certain folks with specific health conditions, and which are not as effective, or can potentially be harmful. And about a year and a half ago now, we got a large grant from the National Institutes of Health to take that concept and to scale it up and to do more with it. So our current project, and Realm Caring is still involved with that, is that we're taking and recruiting people who are on the precipice of newly initiating medical cannabis, and bringing them into a longitudinal study where we will track them from before they start to 1 year after they have started medical cannabis. And we're going to try to do this with at least a cohort of 10,000 patients for a variety of different health conditions, so that we can track them in time to see what products they end up using, what impact it has on their health, what's the likelihood of benefit versus harm versus no impact of medical cannabis. Does that change on whether it's a high THC or a high CBD formulation? Does it change whether they're inhaling it versus eating it versus using a topical? What doses are people settling in on? And so we want to take that information and reverse engineer it to identify and say, okay, this kind of product about this dose and this formulation seems to be working really well for this health condition. Now let's do proper drug development and clinical trials for that, so we can move that forward. The other piece of it is we're trying to leverage what we're knowing there and doing there to take advantage of data that already exists in electronic health records. And so we're partnering with some folks at the computer scientists here at Hopkins that are good at writing natural language processing algorithms and using artificial intelligence to probe health records, to identify folks who are medical cannabis users and compare them to matched controls who are not medical cannabis users. And we're encouraging physicians who see patients who are using medical cannabis to actually document that in the electronic health records, and to develop tools to better capture the details about medical cannabis in the health records, so that we can use that as another source outside of getting this cohort of 10,000 people. We could potentially have 10 million people that we could look at, right? If this stuff starts to get captured. So we want to encourage patients to talk to their doctors about medical cannabis use. And we want to encourage doctors to have that, to start that conversation and to record the details.
Are there specific topics, or what are the specific areas that you're looking at? Just
so all of them. So and again, this is something that we're building as a platform for scientists broadly to access and use. So one of the key pieces of this project is we're building all of the data that we're collecting is going to get put into a data repository. And we're soliciting data from other scientists and other researchers or states or other entities that have collected information on cannabis use and health. And we have a data integration team that is going to piece all of this stuff together, and then we'll grant access to other researchers who get, approval to do so, to come in and utilize our data for what they think is interesting. Say, children with autism, adults with ADHD, people with a certain type of cancer, right? Because not all cancer is the same, and not all cancer responds to the same treatments, right? So there are a number of areas where there's a lot of interest in cannabinoid drug development. And so our hope is to kind of have a big collection of data and a platform for collecting more data, so that we can drill down on some of these things and put some evidence behind it, identify highly likely areas of promise to put more resources into to move things forward.
That's a great way, yeah, to put it. Likely high areas of yeah, right, that could work. I have to say, I do a lot of research and reporting on the medical market in Europe and in Germany, and they are really, medical forward. That's how they're structuring their industry, and they're really collecting a lot of data on consumer use, because you can only get product through a pharmacy. And so they're collecting that data through the pharmacy. And Germany is launching a retail pilot program within the next few months that that has research baked into it, meaning they have to partner with some sort of research university to collect and analyze this data. So I'm just thinking that could be great.
Yeah, that's what we need. And there are programs like that in many different countries. Health Canada has a whole huge
Right, right.
base. There's a big medical cannabis registry in the UK.
Oh,
Australia, the folks at the Lambert Initiative down at the University of Sydney have done wonderful stuff with this. And
wow.
so, our idea is to try to gather data from all of these sources and put them together as much as possible. We've got a paper we're working on right now on recommendations for assessments to use across all of these initiatives to make the integration of the data easier and better. And the more data we have, the more robust we're going to be able to put our minds to and our analytics in to understand how this stuff works.
Yeah, and especially in the United States, we're not really focused on that, and we're not being, the government isn't allowing us to really do this. So I feel like looking at these other countries who are really medical first, cannabis medical first is a great opportunity. And so I guess just to end this, is this initiative, I guess it's in full motion right now. Has it launched and when?
We are launched, so our prospective cohort of patients that is live. We're kind of working out bugs in a smaller group of folks at the moment, but I anticipate within the next month we will be initiating a very large, very intensive ad campaign to bring thousands of people into the fold here. And our work with the electronic health records is already ongoing and working. So we're building the algorithms for and training those algorithms for identifying medical cannabis users. And once we fine tune those, we'll be off to the races with regards to data analysis there. And the repository, we're at the final stages of getting all of the regulatory approvals in place to get that going. And the Hopkins legal team is ready to have data transfer and data use agreements in place with external entities.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so excited. I can't wait to follow that. And then I guess to end, is there anything you want to end with, or is there any outside help, like private outside help that you could use or that you would, invite into your science lab?
Yeah, I mean,
Is there?
outside help is always nice, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that can come in many flavors, right? And so, we are willing to help external companies design good clinical trials and to conduct good studies. If they're interested in pursuing, whether or not a product that they have is beneficial for a health condition. I think that's what we need.
Mhm.
On our side, we're trying to build out and do as much as we can. We do accept donations to support what we're doing. We received a very large, very nice donation from the Wana Brands Foundation a couple of years ago. And that's been instrumental in helping us build out a lot of what we're doing right now.
Oh,
So things like that are incredibly helpful. And then if companies have a need and they don't have the capability of doing some of the research that they can do, we can potentially help, or either doing it or identifying partners to help people do stuff. So again, I don't try to even pretend to do all of this on my own. There's a team of folks here. There are a number of physicians at Hopkins that are very interested in this area. And so we're happy to facilitate work in that regard as needed.
And are you also, another focus I've been looking at is technology transfer departments in universities. Would you, in addition to the research, would you develop a product with a company? Is that something that your department could do, or?
So it's something that's possible, but a lot of times the details of all of that really get it gets challenging to make it easy. So if a company has intellectual property that they're looking to develop, usually they go through a CRO, not a university, to develop it. Now, we have some unique capabilities that CROs might not have, like a Schedule I license and things like that. But my lab is not outfitted or designed to do drug development per se.
Right. And that's what it would be there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.